I knew the moment they called me upstairs without warning. It wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. Alex Trent, the young CEO, who had never bothered to learn my name properly, was already seated next to Karen from HR. No preamble, no apology. Just 5 words that cracked 19 years of loyalty into dust. Your position has been eliminated. Sometimes, it's not the betrayal that hurts the most. It's realizing how invisible your loyalty had become. If you've ever faced a moment like that, I hope you'll stay with me until the end of this story. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just nodded once. The kind of slow, detached movement you make when you're trying to keep your heart from tearing open in public. The hallway outside the conference room stretched endlessly. I walked it alone, feeling every pair of eyes dart away from me the moment I passed. By the time I reached my office, the email had already hit my inbox. Separation agreement attached. Efficient, cold. Like I was just another invoice to be processed. As I packed my things into a cardboard box, my fingers brushed against something familiar. A small silver pendant, tucked away in the drawer. The one my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary. "Stay true," it read in tiny, elegant letters. I slipped it over my neck without thinking, feeling the cool metal press against my skin. A reminder. A lifeline. I could hear whispers from the design floor behind me. A few brave colleagues tried to sneak sympathetic glances, but no one spoke. No one knew what to say to someone who had given everything and been discarded without ceremony. The worst part? I had seen it coming. Over the past 6 months, subtle shifts had crept in like a slow-moving fog. I was pulled off major projects without explanation. Meetings I used to lead were suddenly rescheduled without me. Access to architectural plans, budgeting files, even client proposals, once a simple click away, became restricted. No announcements, no feedback, just distance. Alex Trent had been modernizing Everstone designs ever since he arrived, all in the name of efficiency and future-proofing. Translation: get rid of the veterans who remembered when the company was a small family, not a sleek corporate machine. Still, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. I'd smiled in meetings. I'd taken on extra work. I'd stayed late, covering gaps left by the new hires who were quick with tech jargon, but slow to understand real architecture. I should have trusted my instincts the first time Alex started parading outside consultants through our offices. When I caught him and his new CFO huddled over budgets I hadn't been allowed to review. When I overheard words like restructure, streamline, redundancies in the hallways. I stayed because I loved this place. Because I believed that good work spoke for itself. Because after 19 years, I thought I'd earned my seat at the table. I was wrong. They didn't just plan to replace me. They had been preparing for it for months, quietly, systematically, making sure by the time the hammer fell, I would be too isolated, too powerless to fight back. What they didn't realize, what Alex didn't realize, was that while they were busy cutting me out of meetings and passwords, I was watching. I was documenting. And I had seen something they thought no one would notice. As I lifted the box into my arms, I glanced one last time around the office I had practically built from scratch. Not with sadness, not with rage, with something far sharper. Something they had taught me without even realizing it. Never stay somewhere that treats you like you're disposable, and never walk away without leaving a mark. Everstone Designs wasn't just a place I worked, it was a place I helped build. I joined in 2005, when the company was little more than a cramped 2-room office tucked above a coffee shop in downtown Denver. There were 7 of us back then, juggling everything from client calls to blueprint printing. We worked insane hours. We made last-minute design changes over pizza and cheap beer at 2 in the morning. We pulled each other through project deadlines that seemed impossible. I loved every second of it. Over the years, Everstone grew, and so did I. We moved into bigger offices, landed major contracts with city developers. Our name started appearing on award lists and glossy magazine features. Through it all, I stayed. When better offers came, I stayed. When economic downturns hit and bonuses disappeared, I stayed. Because to me, Everstone wasn't just a paycheck. It was home. I wasn't the loudest. I wasn't the flashiest. But when disaster struck, a sudden client withdrawal, a major contractor default, I was the one they called at midnight when they needed someone to fix a collapsed timeline, a broken design, a lawsuit waiting to happen. They turned to me. I didn't demand recognition. I didn't make scenes. I just did the work. Day after day, year after year. That quiet loyalty used to mean something. 2 years ago, when Alex Trent was brought in as the visionary CEO, things started shifting. He was young, early 30s, polished, brimming with Silicon Valley buzzwords about disruption and synergy and digital ecosystems. He didn't care about the old Everstone. He cared about cutting costs, upgrading systems, and impressing investors with flashy quarterly reports. At first, I tried to be optimistic. Maybe a little fresh energy was what we needed. Maybe new ideas could coexist with the old foundation we had built so carefully. I offered to help him understand the complexity of our legacy systems. I volunteered to mentor some of the new hires he brought in from his former companies. I sat through endless meetings where the word optimization was thrown around like confetti. But slowly, I started noticing the cracks. The projects I used to lead were handed off to newer employees without so much as a conversation. Client accounts I'd nurtured for years were reassigned to people who barely knew the client's names. Design plans that once passed through my desk for final review now bypassed me completely. And then there were the access restrictions. First, it was the design server, then the budgeting files. Finally, even the scheduling software I had helped customize years ago. Each change was small, plausible. Just updating security protocols, they said. Streamlining workflow, they said. I recognized it for what it was, isolation. The more they cut me off, the easier it would be to paint me as obsolete. The fewer projects I touched, the easier it would be to justify letting me go. But there was one thing Alex and his team underestimated. You can lock someone out of systems. You can erase their name from meeting invites. You can even strip away their job title, but you can't erase their knowledge. You can't unteach what they've built with their own hands. I knew Everstone's infrastructure like the back of my hand. Not just the blueprints on paper, but the real, messy, imperfect pathways that made everything work when deadlines closed in and budgets shrank. I knew where every risk was hidden, where every shortcut had been taken, where every emergency patch had been applied to save a project in crisis. And more importantly, I knew where to look when something didn't feel right. In hindsight, maybe I should have walked away the moment the sidelining started. Maybe I should have seen the writing on the wall and spared myself the humiliation of being escorted out like a stranger. But I stayed, because somewhere deep down, I believed that good work still mattered. It didn't. Not to them. But it still mattered to me. And that was the difference that would change everything. The day I first noticed something wrong, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt off. A Thursday evening, past 8 o'clock, when most of the office lights had gone dark except mine. I stayed late to finalize the designs for the Anderson Tower project, one of our largest contracts yet, a project I'd spent 3 years courting and securing. When I went to access the materials database, my login was rejected. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. Puzzled, I sent a quick message to IT, thinking maybe it was a glitch. The reply came back a minute later. Your permissions have been adjusted per management directive. Please contact your supervisor for further details. No explanation, no warning. A chill ran down my spine. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. Everywhere I looked, something smelled wrong. Invoices that didn't line up. Vendor contracts being processed without architectural reviews. Material orders rushed through without my sign-off. Orders tied to a name I didn't recognize. Summit Constructs LLC. I'd been at Everstone long enough to know all our usual partners. Summit wasn't one of them, and yet they were suddenly everywhere. On every new bid, every materials order, every projected timeline adjustment. I dug deeper. Late one night, using my still active access to archived procurement files, I traced the first payment to Summit. A modest $10,000 invoice for consulting services on a minor renovation. Nothing alarming, but the next month, it jumped to $75,000. 2 months later, $150,000. There was no corresponding work, no project photos, no inspection reports, just a growing river of money flowing silently out the door. A quick business lookup on Summit Constructs turned up a registered address, a UPS store mailbox 2 miles from Everstone's main office. No website, no portfolio, no real presence at all. My stomach twisted. When I checked the ownership records, it hit me like a punch in the gut. Summit Constructs was registered under the name Alan Trent, Alex's uncle. That wasn't just shady, it was criminal. Have you ever uncovered something at work that made your heart race, realizing you were standing at the edge of something much bigger than you expected? If you have, or even if you can imagine it, feel free to share your story or thoughts below. You're not alone. For a moment, I just sat there in the dark, my fingers frozen on the keyboard. This wasn't about me being obsolete or expensive. This was about clearing the path, silencing the one person who knew the internal processes too well to let theft slip by unnoticed. They hadn't underestimated my loyalty. They had underestimated my memory, my stubbornness, my ability to smell rot beneath polished surfaces. The pieces fell into place faster than I could process them. The sudden surge of outside consultants, the inexplicable access restrictions, the secrecy behind project budgets I once managed freely, the way Alex had avoided eye contact during our last few all-hands meetings. I realized then, they had been setting this up for months, clearing old trees to make way for their own garden of corruption. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought isolating me would break me. Instead, it sharpened me. Instead of complaining, I had watched. Instead of fighting, I had listened. Instead of burning bridges, I had built a case, one late night at a time. I had copies, I had timelines, I had proof, and most importantly, I had patience. You see, Brooke Harrison didn't just survive 19 years in an industry where architects were treated like interchangeable drafting software by luck. I survived because I knew when to build, and when to wait for the right moment to tear something down, so thoroughly that no one could pretend they hadn't seen the collapse. They thought firing me was the end. In reality, it was only the beginning. The night after I uncovered the truth about Summit Constructs, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of the Denver skyline leaking through the curtains. Andrea, my wife, stirred once or twice beside me, but said nothing. After 22 years, she knew when I was carrying something too heavy for words. At 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed and into my home office. I sat at my desk, fingers resting lightly on the small silver pendant at my neck. Stay true. It wasn't just a motto tonight. It was a strategy. I couldn't blow this up emotionally. I couldn't storm back into Everstone, waving evidence and accusations. They'd paint me as a bitter, disgruntled ex-employee, dismiss me, silence me. If I wanted this to work, I needed to be smarter, quieter, deadlier. First, I made secure copies of everything: procurement records, wire transfer receipts, ownership documents linking Summit Constructs to Alex's family, email chains that, while careful, hinted at internal collusion. I saved them onto 3 encrypted flash drives. One went into my home safe, one into a safe deposit box at our bank, and the last into a small hollowed-out section of an old architecture textbook on my office shelf. Paranoia? Maybe. But after 19 years, I knew better than to trust a single point of failure. Second, I drafted a plan. Everstone's quarterly board meeting was coming up in less than 2 weeks. It was the perfect opportunity. Alex would be presenting Everstone's record growth to justify his performance bonus. The timing couldn't be better to drop a bomb that would detonate exactly when the board was paying the most attention. But I couldn't approach the board directly, not yet. Instead, I would let the facts speak first, anonymously. Using an old internal test account I still had access to, thank you, lazy IT offboarding protocols, I crafted an email, simple, direct, professional. Subject line, urgent financial irregularities, immediate board review. Advised, no drama, no accusations, just bullet points outlining suspicious transactions, inflated vendor payments, and the ownership link between Summit Constructs and Alex's family. I attached the critical documents. Encrypted, of course. Password to follow separately if needed. It would be enough to ignite scrutiny without revealing my identity immediately. Because I knew how these things worked. If they could identify the whistleblower too soon, they'd discredit the messenger before they even read the message. This way, they'd be forced to confront the evidence first. The board was full of old-school executives, many of whom valued loyalty, but none of whom would risk their reputations covering for outright fraud. Timing would be everything. I scheduled the email to send at precisely 9:00 a.m. on the morning of the board meeting. Then I sat back in my chair, the city lights blinking against the window pane like distant warnings. I wasn't scared, not anymore. If Everstone had taught me anything over 19 years, it was that real architecture isn't about what's on the surface. It's about the foundation underneath, the hidden structures, the unseen reinforcements that keep everything standing long after the flashy designs have faded. Alex had built his empire on a rotten foundation, and soon it would all come crashing down with a single well-placed strike. The morning of the board meeting, I woke up before sunrise. No alarm needed. Somewhere between anticipation and calculation, my body already knew today was the day everything would shift. I made coffee, moving slowly, methodically, as if the act itself was a way of steadying my nerves. I wore jeans and a sweatshirt. No power suits, no polished shoes. I didn't need armor today. I wasn't marching into a battlefield. I was watching one collapse. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the scheduled email launched from the old Everstone test account. By 9:15, my phone buzzed with the first response. An unfamiliar number, likely a board assistant or a corporate counsel. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Instead, I drove to a quiet coffee shop downtown, found a booth in the back, and set up my laptop. From there, I could monitor the fallout without being anywhere near the explosion. At 9:45, a second message came through, this one from Everstone's general counsel. The subject line was terse, confidential inquiry, immediate response requested. I smiled slightly and closed the laptop. They were scrambling. Good. Inside Everstone's sleek glass headquarters, the board meeting was in full swing. Alex Trent, no doubt standing at the front of the conference room, was likely halfway through his victory speech about cutting costs, improving margins, and future-proofing Everstone's legacy. He had no idea the floor was about to cave in beneath him. By 10:15, news started leaking from inside the building. An old contact from finance messaged me privately. "Something's going on. Alex looks like he's seen a ghost." They pulled him and the CFO into a side meeting mid-presentation. By 10:30, local time, word had reached the design teams. Emergency audit. Board-ordered review of all recent vendor transactions. Immediate freeze on external contractor payments, including Summit Constructs. And that was just the beginning. At 11:00, another ping on my phone, this time from a junior architect I'd mentored years ago. "They're calling it a compliance emergency. People are crying in the break room. It's chaos." Good. Let it be chaos. Let them feel a fraction of the uncertainty, the betrayal, the helplessness they had tried to impose on me. Meanwhile, I wasn't just sipping coffee and watching. I was moving my second set of evidence, the deeper file packages, into cloud storage accounts with staggered scheduled releases, all encrypted, with release triggers set in case anything happened to me. Paranoid? Maybe. But when you've seen people gut a company from the inside without blinking, you learn not to trust maybe. At noon, my old colleague in accounting confirmed it. Alex left the building with 2 board members. Didn't look happy. HR's in a closed-door session with legal. By early afternoon, Everstone's normally polished PR team had gone dark. Their social media feeds, usually a parade of new project announcements, fell silent. No happy photos, no press releases, no congratulatory posts. They were too busy trying to contain the fire. The board wasn't stupid. They understood quickly that what had been presented as vendor optimization was, in fact, a very carefully hidden embezzlement scheme. Not just a misstep, a betrayal. A risk to investors. A potential violation of federal statutes. And the signature trails led directly back to Alex Trent and his carefully placed allies. Inside my chest, a cold satisfaction started to grow. This wasn't rage anymore. It wasn't even personal. It was simple cause and effect. You steal, you lie, you destroy trust, you fall. Around 2 p.m., I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Brooke? The voice was tight, strained. Alex. We need to talk, he said. I let the silence stretch out so long he had to fill it himself. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we can find a way to resolve this without causing more damage. I almost laughed at the desperation bleeding through his polished facade. There's no misunderstanding, Alex, I said finally. You misunderstood who you were dealing with. Before he could respond, I hung up. There would be no bargaining, no behind-the-scenes deals, no compromises. What was broken had to be exposed, not buried. By the time I drove past Everstone's headquarters later that afternoon, the front entrance was swarming with unfamiliar vehicles. Dark sedans, legal teams, external auditors. The architects and designers inside must have been peeking through the blinds, wondering what storm had landed on their once untouchable company. I almost felt a pang of sadness for them. Almost. They hadn't caused the rot, but they had lived above it for too long, pretending not to notice the cracks in the floor. Now, everyone could see the damage. Now, no one could look away. And this was only the beginning. By the next morning, the fallout was impossible to contain. Everstone Designs, once the golden child of Denver's architecture scene, was under full-scale investigation. The board had moved fast, too fast for Alex or his allies to recover. Alex Trent was suspended indefinitely, pending a full forensic audit. The CFO, who had signed off on the fraudulent payments, was quietly escorted out of the building with no press release, no farewell party. 2 others, middle managers complicit in approving Summit Construct's invoices, were placed on immediate administrative leave. The news broke across local business outlets within hours. Everstone Designs under investigation for financial misconduct. CEO suspended. No names were officially released at first, but insiders leaked enough details to set off a storm of speculation across the industry. Clients paused projects. Prospective partners withdrew proposals. Recruiters started circling Everstone's top talent, sensing blood in the water. The board scrambled to contain the damage. Emergency meetings, temporary freezes on spending, promises of full transparency moving forward. But reputations, like buildings, aren't repaired overnight once the foundation cracks. I watched it all unfold from a quiet distance, sipping my coffee, my silver pendant resting against my heart. Not gloating, not celebrating, simply acknowledging a simple truth. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had underestimated the consequences of betraying the very people who built their success. Later that week, I received a formal letter from Everstone's legal team. An offer. Return to Everstone, not just as an architect, but as Chief Integrity Officer. Full executive authority to audit every department. Direct reporting line to the board, bypassing traditional executive chains. An independent budget. a mandate to rebuild what they had allowed to rot. I stared at the letter for a long time. It wasn't about pride or revenge. It was about purpose. If I returned, it would be on my terms. If I returned, it would be to make sure no one else was ever silenced or discarded the way I had been. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth salvaging. Not the company they had tried to turn Everstone into, but the company we had built long before greed took root. And if not, I was ready to build something new, this time from the ground up, with the right foundation. Either way, the choice was mine. Finally, 3 months later, I walked into Everstone's headquarters, not as an employee, but as an independent consultant. The receptionist stood up when they saw me, offering cautious, respectful smiles. Old colleagues who once glanced away now nodded as I passed. It wasn't fear I saw in their eyes. It was something rarer, understanding. The rebuilding had begun. New leadership was in place. Alex Trent, the CFO, and the corrupted managers were no longer names on the door. They were footnotes in a cautionary tale. The projects I consulted on now bore a different energy. You could feel it. The quiet return of pride, of trust, of accountability. The foundation we had once built in sweat and late nights was being unearthed and strengthened again, brick by brick. I wasn't here to reclaim the past. I was here to help shape something better, stronger, smarter, less fragile. Standing by the giant windows overlooking downtown Denver, I touched the silver pendant around my neck and allowed myself a small smile. Stay true. It had carried me through the betrayal. It had anchored me when the world tried to write me off. And now, it reminded me of something even more important. Sometimes, survival isn't just about holding your ground. Sometimes, it's about knowing exactly when to walk away and when to come back with your own terms in hand. Maybe you've been through something similar, a time when loyalty wasn't enough, when you had to choose between clinging to what was broken or building something new. If you have, know this: you weren't weak for leaving. You were strong for recognizing your worth. Feel free to share your story, your moment of clarity, or even just a quiet victory you're proud of. Our bridges don't collapse because we failed. They collapse because we outgrew them.